Get the kids in school.
Joining me is Jim Pfaff. Jim is the president of the Conservative Caucus. You can find out more about Jim at theconservativecaucus.org, theconservativecaucus.org. Jim, good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How you doing, Bobby?
Good. When we booked you, I think I booked you like on Thursday or whatever, we had some topics. I didn't have Zelensky in the topic list.
True. It's been an interesting weekend after the Friday supposed blow up, and it actually reveals so many interesting things about what's going on with the Ukraine situation. And it's very interesting to watch Donald Trump react to this. And frankly, I think he is the adult in the room so far.
So, and how about the reports now from the New York Post, but also a post by a Democrat senator admitting basically on X that they met with Zelensky beforehand and told him don't take the deal?
Well, this is really critical. And by the way, we also found out that there was a deal on, I believe it was November 17th of last year, that Great Britain and European countries had not discussed, that they were already attempting to make with him. So there could have been some collusion with Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and others prior to this meeting. I mean, Donald Trump was being accused of ambushing this meeting, and to be candid, it was the Democrats, particularly Chris Murphy, whom you're referencing, the senator from Connecticut. And Keir Starmer. The reality is, this entire war is filled with a bunch of corrupt behavior. Every one of us, when Russia attacked Ukraine, were very concerned and very supportive of the Ukrainian people for having been so murderously and horribly attacked. But as this thing is drug on, we're finding out that the corruption and the money flowing through this, which we cannot still account for fully, is really playing a big part in it. And Zelensky is showing himself to be the kind of leader that is at best dubious and at worst highly corrupt. It was shockingly, because when he was elected as president of Ukraine, again, he was applauded. He was supposed to be a change for a very corrupt country. This thing stinks to high heaven, and yet you've got so many neocons and people who love war beating up Donald Trump on this. Donald Trump understands what's going on here because he's really smart about it. And that's really what we need to be focusing on here is what Donald Trump has been pointing out, because he's right.
Well, they're also trying to make it a false choice. There's some people saying you're choosing Russia over Ukraine. Trump is choosing the American people and the people in California who lost their homes to the devastating fires, the people in Florida who've lost their homes in Florida and from the hurricanes from North Carolina, South Carolina. He's choosing the people who are victims of fentanyl. He's choosing the people over the southern border in the southern border states. He's choosing America first, and he's saying we're not going to keep spending all this. He promised that we wouldn't keep spending this money just ad nauseum without it being held accountable. And if you don't want to reach a peace agreement, how long it's a parent basically saying to the kid, you're living in my house and I don't have a right to ask you how much longer do you plan on doing it and how much more is this going to cost me?
What's so crazy about where we've come in the United States, evidenced by everything you just said, which I fully agree with, is that we have got serious situations around the world of corruption that we have been funding. The USAID revelation shows a whole lot. We're dumping all this money into foreign countries and entirely blowing off our own people here. I mean, the North Carolina thing is particularly significant. We literally had proof that that FEMA employees were refusing to help people with Trump signs in their houses and ridiculing and mocking them as they're going through this devastating hurricane that ran right up through Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, and North Carolina. North Carolina and Georgia took the worst of it. These people are in distress even to this day. I mean, there are people sleeping in tents in the middle of winter, and yet all of a sudden Donald Trump is this horrible person for trying to hold Zelensky accountable to elections and to the money that we had given him. He laid out a wonderful deal that would allow peace in that region and allow a significant connection between Ukraine and the United States that could be positive for both countries. And yet he walks away because our Democrat leaders here and some Republicans and all of Europe, they love war. They want war. They want to pay off the people who make the money off of war. And in all this process, Donald Trump's criticized when he is, as you rightly say, focusing on the people of the United States who have needs of their own.
I love the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said this quote over the weekend: 500 million Europeans are asking 300 million Americans to defend them. That was brilliant. And then this Father Michael Petskoskik, I'm not sure if you see how you say his name, he is a Ukrainian priest who goes into a long dissertation which ends with seeing the expression of Ukraine's ambassador during the infamous meeting, which, if watched in its entirety, does not support any anti-Trump narrative. She sees what Zelensky did, and she knows that the Ukrainians will continue. It's a great picture. She's looking down. Her head is held in her hands, and you can just see she's mortified. He said, and he goes on to say, "You stand with Ukraine, spare me. Your virtue signaling is just a tacit support for an ongoing war, one that Ukraine can't win. You're just cheering on slaughter." And he also before that said that you're being pro continuation of this war is just a chance to troll Donald Trump, because they hate Trump so much that they met with Zelensky beforehand to try to undercut his meeting. It doesn't matter if the Ukrainian people suffer. All that matters is that they embarrass Trump.
And the Ukrainian people are suffering greatly because leaders in Europe and Joe Biden, prior to Donald Trump, have caused this war to continue on unnecessarily for a long period of time. It is not pro-Putin to try to get to peace here in any way. By the way, I had a dear friend of mine over in Great Britain post a video of Alexander Daninsky. This will probably get rolling out. This guy was thrown into prison. He was a member of the Ukrainian parliament. He got thrown into prison in 2021, and in part due to efforts of the Biden administration to try to call him a Russian agent, when what he was doing, and he was part of Zelensky's party in 2019 when he was elected to parliament, but he broke away from Zelensky when he started to see that potentially Zelensky was doing things in our elections, when he saw how the war is going on and Zelensky is profiting from it. He was pointing these things out and then suddenly thrown into jail because of disinformation and called a Russian agent. That sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We have to recognize that there is so much going on in the world over the last at least 5 decades, if not a little bit longer. We have shifted from a post-World War II era of just trying to fight against communism and protect freedom around the world to a largesse of taxes, money taken from the American people and from people in other countries too, that gets thrown in to these NGOs and other entities and defense contractors to some degree as well, who are political advocates for the left, for Democrats in this country, who are undermining our election process. And it got even worse under Barack Obama and through the Biden administration, where we dumped even more money into these NGOs that provide no service to the United States. It's just a pass-through of money to political actors. That's what we found out with the USAID thing. And people who are leftist political actors are getting money. It's very third world what we're doing right now. It's very third world what Europe is doing, because they're just as much involved with this. We already know the UN has been involved with this. There's a serious problem that Donald Trump is addressing, and he's the best chance we have to stop this bleeding, because it is bleeding us.
It's it is bleeding us. incredibly so. It's killing us. And they the left, like you said, these NGOs, that non-governmental organizations that take our tax dollars and do all this diversity, equity, inclusion. They're worried about all that stuff. And if they didn't worry about all that stuff, they might have the money to defend themselves, or we might have the more money to defend Ukraine, but we don't, because we've wasted on all this other stuff around the world. We've wasted our money there with diversity, equity, inclusion. I look at Europe, and I look at how the way they've allowed themselves to be invaded by radical Islam. Europe is overrun with radical Islamists, and yet they're now worried about America is worried about us being overrun. Defend our borders first before you defend foreign countries. Europe might want to take a page from that, because they're overrun, and yet they're worried about Ukraine. Again, I feel badly for the people of Ukraine. They're the victims in all of this. To be clear, Putin's an evil person. But it's not our war to fight. We cannot keep fighting it. If we keep doing it, we're going to sink ourselves. We're going to drown. You can't save a drowning man if you yourself are drowning, and we're drowning in debt.
There is no doubt about that. Listen, under the name of democracy, an order of world elites, signified by the World Economic Forum and the UN, and looking at what the EU is doing to strip, FYI, freedoms from all their people. Great Britain under Keir Starmer is doing the same thing. But under that so-called cover of democracy, they're taking away freedoms in the West. By the way, just a little side note here, and I'm very involved with this. Down in Brazil, I know former President Jair Bolsonaro and his son Eduardo. I was just with Eduardo at CPAC recently. They're about to take Eduardo's passport away under no pretense of anything legal. They have been throwing people in jail. They have been taking their assets away from them. Brazil is under this same problem, and it's all about misinformation, disinformation, and not standing up for the government, which is not what Western democracies ever should have done. There is an international movement. And by the way, I should say this. Joe Biden was involved in the 2022 elections to take out Jair Bolsonaro. Literally, like he had the FBI down there, he had the CIA down there. He sent the State Department down there to tell him to stand down on any criticism of their election process. This is happening now, we know, in Ukraine. This is happening in Europe. Zelensky calls off elections in Ukraine. This situation is dire. Donald Trump right now, added to that in a more minor capacity, Javier Milei down in Argentina and some others. We're seeing a little bit of light coming through this darkness, but we have been under a dark cloud for 30 to 50 years of an international cabal to take away liberties and freedoms under the guise of democracy. This has to stop. Donald Trump is the one person who can do this. He's been very effective so far, and he doesn't care what anyone thinks about it. So we need to be supportive of that. If anyone cares about this country and cares about liberty, you've got to stand by Donald Trump on this stuff. There are going to be mistakes. There are going to be errors, but this is our only hope right now, in my opinion.
The venom with which they've gone after J.D. Vance on his vacation, the protesters that met him in Vermont and everything else, folks, the shrapnel, the flak is always the most intense when you're over the target. Don't you wonder, I wonder this, don't you wonder, has anybody bothered to ask this question? What do the people of Ukraine want? And an election might tell us that, but he hasn't allowed an election because the people of Ukraine might say, listen, I want this over. Let them have what they took. Maybe they'd say, no, we want to keep fighting. But what do the people of Ukraine want? And if the people of Ukraine want to keep fighting, then so be it. Let them fight, but then come up with the money from somewhere else.
Well, and there have been polls taken, and I don't know how accurate they were. I haven't been able to dig into them deeply or know how well they can be conducted in Ukraine, but they seem to indicate that 70% of the people do not want Zelensky to continue the war. They want out of the war. I mean, listen, the citizens of countries are being shut down so that the leaders of those countries who become wealthy in their positions of leadership. We see this in Congress and Nancy Pelosi and everyone all the time, but we see this in the EU too. All these politicians are becoming fabulously wealthy, worth millions of dollars or the equivalent, and yet the people are being shut down at every turn. There's a mass censorship effort taking place in the EU, an even worse one taking place in the UK. Zelensky's throwing his political opponents in jail. He's refusing to have an election. I feel pretty certain that he would lose that election. And there was this argument about, there's nothing in the Constitution that requires him to have an election anymore. Who cares? I mean, Abraham Lincoln got rid of habeas corpus to help protect the government, but he also held an election so that the people could determine if he was doing the proper job. We did it in the midst of a very serious civil war, and our freedoms in this country were reserved because of that. There's nothing like freedom happening in Ukraine. It's going away in many areas of the world. This is our last stand. If we do not survive these efforts to overthrow liberty around the world, and particularly in our country, and most significantly in our country, by the way,
Jim
then
Pfaff.
we will have lost it forever.
Jim Pfaff with the Conservative Caucus, theconservativecaucus.org, theconservativecaucus.org. Thank you, Jim.
When you're part of a military family, you understand sacrifice and support. At American